Okay, in this video snippet, I'm going to quickly cover the first principle of WordPress productivity, which is define the job in detail with a content-first approach. Now, Keene's original principle was define the job in detail. I added the content-first approach because I've found that if you don't take a content-first approach, then you get bogged way down in the client's not delivering you the content. You're waiting to get paid because the client hasn't given you the content, so you can't finish the website. And I'm done with that. The way that I approach it keeps that from happening. And I'll share more about that with you later. Define the job in detail. Basically, it's the biggest principle of all the principles, and some of the other principles kind of feed into this principle because this isn't like an activity that takes place one time. This is a constant iterative process. And by iterative, I mean that you find out some things, you back up a few steps, you change it a little bit, and then you end up with a better result. So by drilling down into more detail over time is how you do that. Now, this whole process of defining the job in detail generally is about 60 to 70% of the project. Because let's face it, you and I both know building a WordPress website does not take that long, especially if you have all the pieces and parts all laid out. It's defining the website, getting all the content together, getting all that pulled together and implemented on the website. That's the problem. So if you spend that time that you need to spend on the front end before you ever build a page or code anything or install a plugin, then you're going to be way better off because you're going to have way fewer surprises. You'll have found all of those before you ever started. That's the main thing. Okay, so you can basically divide defining the job in detail into two sections, okay? In terms of the project-related pieces that you need to define for your client, you need to make sure that you define your management approach in great detail. And I always use the 6 principles of productivity management as part of my management approach because it really gets them to understand how important it is to do this design on the front end and the drilling down into the details on the front end so that we don't end up with change problems on the back end. I always include roles and responsibilities. You've got to define a scope. You've got to define what's in scope, what's out of scope. And another thing I do is I define what's in scope, but the client's responsibility. And I'll talk about why I do that later. You got your business requirements. Now, see, what I find a lot of people doing is they just immediately start jumping in saying, oh, you need an About Me page, you needed this page, you needed that page, but they haven't even discussed with the clients what their business requirements are for this website. Some websites are just meant to establish an online presence. Other websites are just like a brochure informational. Other websites, they want to sell a product. Other websites, they want to become a thought leader. So all of those things have a bearing on how many pages, where things are. You know, some people don't need an About Me page. Sometimes About Me is fine. There's a paragraph on the home page, and that's all they really need. So depending on the needs of their business. So that's why those business requirements are really important. And then, of course, you've got your estimate, which you need to define up front. Then you've got the solution-related pieces and parts of your definition, which include things like your list of deliverables and what are the acceptance criteria for those deliverables? What are the plugins you're going to use? The products and services that the client is going to offer on their website. The pages in post, your work breakdown structure, the sitemap, all of those are pieces and parts that you can use to define the job in detail. You don't have to use all of them, and in the complete WordPress project management roadmap that I'm developing, I'll tell you exactly the ones that have been successful for me. The other thing that's included in the solution-related section of defining the job in detail is content. I don't do any development until all the content is received. Now, does that mean your project could draw out forever? Sometimes, but I also use something called a minimum viable website that keeps that from happening too. And I'll tell you more about that later on in some of these videos. So let's recap. Number 1, the define the job in detail is not a one-time event that you do at the beginning in the proposal and then you're done with it. It's something that you have to continue to do because things are continually discovered. However, the first 60 to 70% of the project is nothing but defining the job in detail. And if you take the appropriate amount of time and get the appropriate approvals from your client, I promise you, you'll have way less surprises on the back end. Now, in the complete WordPress project management roadmap, I'm going to break these things down by phases and activities, so you'll be able to see where to apply this principle all the way through the roadmap. So that's principle number 1. Next, we're going to talk about principle number 2, get the right resources involved. See you in the next video.